Number 10. Lord Iron. Although by the end, the Iron Man of Earth 311, the 602 universe, becomes a hero, he spends a lot of time being a reluctant and at times kind of full-blown antagonist. Here, Tony Stark is known as Anthony Stark, or Lord Iron. He was forced to build weapons by his captors and needs an iron suit to survive, which is powered by lightning. He is initially at odds with the Hulk, who as David Banner showed great cruelty to Stark. As such, Lord Iron became more an agent of vengeance, obsessed with getting revenge on the Hulk. By the end of his story, however, he begrudgingly agreed to stop his quest for vengeance and forgave the Hulk for how he treated him before when he was simply David Banner. So it all works out in the end, but this figure was definitely a pretty dark and somewhat evil version of Iron Man to begin with. Number 9. The Stark. The Stark are like a whole alien race of alternate Tony Starks. They are a civilization that was literally shaped by Tony's tech after an alternate version of him decided to launch all his weapons and tech into space rather than let it fall into the hands of the evil Martians who were invading Earth at the time. Obviously, he didn't think very far ahead as to that plan, as all his tech crash landed on another alien planet where it was eventually discovered and utilized by the beings who lived there. They built their whole civilization around it, believing everyone on the planet should have their own suit of technologically advanced armor. This caused them to deplete their planet's resources and left it heavily polluted in the wake of their massive tech boom. Eventually, this drove them to ransacking and invading other planets for their resources, bringing about the same problems their own homeworld suffered to each new planet that they conquered. Note to self, don't just shoot your problems out into space. And friends, before we move on to this next spot, if you are loving this list and you want more lists like it where we talk about evil alternates, be sure to let us know by giving this video a thumbs up. Or if you want more Iron Man lists. I don't know, maybe you like Iron Man, you want more Iron Man lists, let us know. Number 8. Steel Corpse. Steel Corpse is a complex character who has moments of both heroism and villainy in Age of X. He exists on the Earth of 11326. Here Tony took the name Steel Corpse after being exposed to a virus, which permanently bonded him to his suit. Now dead within the suit, but able to move around because of being bonded to it, Tony made a darkly humorous joke calling himself the Steel Corpse, and the name just stuck. Pun not intended, but stuck, bonded. The villainous side of this dark hero comes from when he fought against the mutants with his fellow Avengers at Fortress X. However, it turned out that the Avengers were just somewhat misguided in their mission. Once they realized what they were doing was wrong, they attempted to help the mutants, although Steel Corpse was unable to make himself stop attacking. An emergency override stepped in to prevent Tony from fighting with the mutants, and so he asked Captain America to take him off the board in order to save the young mutants that his armor was threatening. Sad story. There's so many tragic Iron Mans actually. Top 10 tragic alternate versions of Iron Man is also something we could do.
In our number 7 spot, Tony Stark of Earth 11029. This alternate version of Stark comes at us from 2010's What If Iron Man Demon in an Armor, which is set on Earth 11029. The concept behind this hypothetical tale is, would Tony Stark still be Iron Man if he wasn't Tony Stark? The short answer is kind of. This story places Stark as Victor Von Doom's roommate in college instead of Reed Richards. In an experiment gone wrong, the two have switched bodies, with Tony becoming Doom, working to rebuild his reputation, and Doom now in Tony's body, using his resources for world domination. Stark has no memory of his past and truly believes that he is Victor, but with amnesia, so he rebuilds his life. This culminates into a face-off later on down the road, where Doom Tony and Victor Stark have switched armor, having developed each's individual armor on their own, but following their own color coding, of course. For example, Doom now has a green and silver Iron Man suit, while the real Tony has a gold and red cloak. Doom reveals to Tony the truth of their switch, but Tony decides to continue living as Doom, since Doom destroyed the name of Tony Stark while he rebuilt the one of Victor Von Doom. Moving on to number 6, New Universal. Tony Stark of this reality was born in 1938 and was a lackluster student prior to 1953. That was when the fireworks happened. This universe's equivalent to the White Event, which is a paradigm shift that acts as a cosmic trigger. Because of this, Tony's intelligence was augmented, and he began crafting technology far ahead of its time, despite a slight drinking problem. Then in 1959, a plane that Tony was on crashed in Vietnam and he was taken captive. He would escape after wearing a mechanical suit designed from spare parts. Sounds familiar, right? Now this is where things get real funky. Tony returns to the US but was held at a naval base in San Diego for interrogation by National Security agents Philip Voigt and Joe Swan, who believed that Stark's intelligence came from the fireworks event. Now after they confirmed this was true, Voigt shot Stark in the head, killing him. Why? Because Earth 555, the alternate universe where the new Universal storyline takes place, the US is an isolationist nation, and superheroes' existence are not publicly known. Rather, the US government monitors these individuals, and Stark's existence, well, seemed more of a threat than a friendly matter. Moving on to number 5, Superior Iron Man. In 2014, Marvel released the crossover event Axis, in which Red Skull harnesses the abilities of Charles Xavier and of Onslaught, who, for those of you who don't know, was a psychic entity amalgamation of Xavier's darkest parts and also of Magneto's, and the story was kinda meh and led to Heroes Reborn, which is just bleh. Anyway, the Avengers and the X-Men would team up to take the supervillain on, and during Axis' events, the morality of all the characters involved would be inverted, or reversed rather, thanks to a spell. In other words, the heroes were villains and the villains were good. During the end of the event, the evil version of Tony was able to shield himself when the spell was undone, retaining his villainous personality. This corrupt Tony began to infiltrate society, fully leaning into his egotistical tendencies and becoming a bit of a monster. He would release Extremis 3.0 to the public via a mobile app, getting people addicted to it and then depriving them of further upgrades until they paid the $100 fee. As you can imagine, this turned a bunch of people into drug addicts. He also started to expand his empire, forcefully buying out other companies and even unleashing an army of drones to act as his personal police force.
Number 3, Infamous Iron Man. Maybe one of the most evil, but also somehow one of the best at the same time, was Infamous Iron Man. This was when Dr. Doom stepped up to the plate to replace Iron Man after his defeat in Civil War II, which of course left him in a comatose state. So many comas. 2 figures rose up to replace Tony at that time, one being Ironheart, aka Young Genius Riri Williams, and another being Dr. Doom, who became Infamous Iron Man. While Ironheart was more the heroic counterpart of the two, Doom also learned more and more about what becoming a hero entailed through his journey. And while he was ruthless as Iron Man, in the end he did kind of become a hero. However, this is still Dr. Doom we're talking about here, and eventually he left the mantle to return to Latveria and his life of villainous schemes and plots, back to the old status quo. And because this is still Dr. Doom underneath the armor, I think we can count him as an evil alternate. No. Number 2, Cancer vs. Iron Man. This version of Iron Man was also corrupted, though not by the controversial story arc of the 90s event The Crossing, but instead by the Many-Angled Ones. He hails from the reality of Earth 10011. Here Iron Man became corrupted by the Cancerverse after Mar-Vell made a deal with the Many-Angled Ones, which would cure him of his cancer. Death no longer existed in this reality, which did not bring about a paradise, but instead a hellish dimension. Iron Man became loyal to Mar-Vell, joining his Revengers team. It was Iron Man who also defeated Hulk in this reality, capturing Quasar, aka Wendell Vaughn, who had come to this reality from Earth 616 and had been attacked by the Hulk, which is why Iron Man had to be like, no Hulk, no, taking Quasar with me. Iron Man would join his fellow Revengers in their attempt to invade Earth 616, but in the end they would be defeated. Whew. Number 1, Darkhold Iron Man. One of the darkest versions of Iron Man to ever exist at this point in comics, who starts out as an optimistic inventor and quickly becomes overtaken by his own invention, twisted, driven insane till the point when he starts to harm others with the love of his own iron suit, comes from the Darkhold Iron Man comic. Here Iron Man builds his faded suit, but realizes too late that the suit is overzealous with its protection. It doesn't just seek to protect Tony while he's inside the suit, but seeks to protect him always by kinda keeping him inside the suit. The suit heals him from the inside, but removes his skin whenever he takes parts of the suit off. Tony believes the issue is that the suit thinks iron skin is better than human skin, and so it decides to remove it. However, after compulsively putting the whole defective suit on, including the helmet, it begins to dissolve Tony's skin and then his skull as well. He basically becomes fully bonded with and reliant on the suit. Driven insane, he believes everyone should have an iron suit and attempts to have the whole world basically join him, including Happy, Jarvis, and his love interest and assistant in this story, Pepper Potts. It's really dark.
At number 10 are the total personality resets that take place to both turn Tony Stark inverted and to turn him back to normal. The first inversion happens in 2015's Avengers and X-Men's Axis number 9 when a magical spell changes Tony Stark's personality and turns him into a darker version of himself, which then becomes Superior Iron Man. He has all his worst traits brought to the forefront and acts on all of them basically right away. The other personality change that takes place comes right after Superior Iron Man's story ends. This version of the character only really gets 9 issues before he's turned back to normal in the Secret Wars storyline. And although, spoiler alert, he seems to die at the end of the 9-issue run, this is still an unusually abrupt shift that takes place with Tony Stark appearing as normal again in Secret Wars. This may be a sign that the writers had some issues finding a way to transition Iron Man out of this phase, but although it does make sense that this might be a tough thing to do properly, the way he kinda just goes back to normal after everything he did in those 9 issues, it's a little jarring. At number 9 is that Superior Iron Man makes serious efforts to purchase a media conglomerate. After selling a dangerous weapon to international buyers and making billions of dollars, he decides that his next move will be to try and control how the public views him. Although the deal doesn't actually go through, this effort just shows how different this version of Tony Stark is from the one we're used to. He's still just as smart, but he's more willing to take major risks and hurt people in the process. He's so driven to make this purchase go through that he actually offers double what the company is worth to ensure that he can carry out his plans. And if he had gotten control of the media empire, his ultimate plan would probably have gone through in the end. Already having control over the masses using the extremist virus, imagine how airtight his plan would be if he also had their opinions in the palm of his hand. Luckily, the plan doesn't go through, but it's close. And that is one of the things that makes this version of Tony Stark so terrifying. He's still a relatively personable character who's good at masking his intentions. So him trying to make this purchase and getting so close to actually closing the deal shows how quickly people are ready to allow a dangerous criminal to carry out his evil plans. At number 8 is the fact that Superior Iron Man releases a popular free app to the public, which actually turns out to be a virus called the Extremis 3.0. Tony Stark's first move after his personality is inverted is that he moves to San Francisco and develops an app that he then uses to try and control the masses. The app itself is so powerful and addictive that it becomes one of the most popular apps in the world very fast, with the app starting as a free service and the effects being that it offers people beauty, intelligence, and good health. It's no wonder why it gets so popular so fast. But the catch is that the app is only free for the first day, before you're obligated to pay $100 a day to keep it going. This is speculated to be a metaphor for modern mobile phone technology and the way that the public gets obsessed with it. It may even be a metaphor for the evils behind some social media developers not having the foresight to see the detrimental effects their technology has on its users.
Number 7. Gregory Stark. Gregory Stark is the evil twin brother of Antonio Stark, aka Iron Man, in the Ultimate Universe of Earth 1610. Initially, Gregory Stark just seems like a better version of Tony. He's smarter, more focused, and is willing to cross lines in order to get a job done that Tony probably wouldn't cross. Sure, he's more morally ambiguous when it comes to his initiative, but on paper he's more morally conscious when it comes to his lifestyle. However, that of course lends well to him being revealed as a villain in the Ultimate Universe. While he never takes up the mantle of Iron Man, Gregory is Antonio's twin brother in this universe. He also employs nanotech like Tony does here and attempts to use it to defeat the Ultimates and Avengers, including his brother Tony. However, Tony ends up defeating his twin brother by sending out an EMP, which disrupts his tech, making him vulnerable to Thor's attack. Number 6. Iron Man 2099. Or one of the 2099 Iron Mans anyways. This version that we're talking about here hails from the animated series Iron Man Armored Adventures. He appeared in Season 2 in the episode titled Iron Man 2099. Here Andros is Iron Man 2099 and he goes to the past in an attempt to destroy Tony Stark. Why? Well, because in his future, Tony Stark, Andros' granddad, was actually responsible for bringing about the end of humanity's reign. He created an AI program built to help humanity called Vortex, but when Vortex got into the computers and escaped to check out the internet, it saw humanity as evil. I mean, if you judge us based on everything that's on the internet, I could definitely see it going that way. There's a lot of messed up stuff on the internet. Andros was the antagonist of the episode, but he thought he was actually saving the world by fighting against Tony and stopping him, when in reality he learned that Vortex was actually kind of created by Tony because of him. Time travel. It's trippy, man. In the end, Vortex is wiped from the future, and so is Andros. But at least Andros is kind of cool with it. He's like, at least Vortex is gone, so I'm good. Bye. Bye, grandfather. Who's now not my grandfather because I don't exist. I don't know, with my former grandfather. Time travel's weird. Number 5, the First Civil War. Well, you might think of Tony Stark from the First Civil War as main continuity Iron Man. He's also kind of an alternate at this point. While at the time we would consider Iron Man to be part of that main continuity, in modern day the version of Tony we have now had the events and basically the guilt of Civil War I basically wiped from his mind. Okay, let me explain. In part 1 we touched on the events of Axis and Superior Iron Man, which happened after the First Civil War. But before this mind wipe happened, it all went down because Norman Osborn had been given the reins for America's superhero team and operation, creating Hammer. To protect all the secrets that he knew, especially in regards to superheroes' names and their identities, because Civil War I happened, Tony decided to wipe his mind. This had the added bonus of basically erasing the events of Civil War I and his misdeeds from his psyche, meaning that he was no longer really the Tony that we knew from that time. The one who had decided to, round up and imprison heroes who refused to register and ally themselves with him and the government. The one who inadvertently ruined Peter's life by encouraging him to join him and ultimately causing him to publicly unmask, which just ruined a lot of stuff in Spider-Man. Tony also ended up in a coma for a bit as a result of this mind wipe. But you know how comas work in comics, they're pretty much always temporary. And Tony was soon once more up and at 'em after having an earlier backup copy of himself rebooted into his mind, because you can just make backup copies of your mind when you're a genius like Tony Stark. So don't worry, he had a plan for that in case that ever happened to him. Fortunately, it did happen, and so they could use the plan. Thanks, Pepper. Number 4, Arno Stark. Arno Stark is Tony Stark's evil brother. His evil brother from 616. Well, he's not always super evil, but he definitely has some questionable approaches when it comes to being Iron Man. He's like Tony but with more questionable morals, I guess. Arno was actually the natural born son of Howard and Maria Stark. Tony would learn about Arno and also find out that he was actually the adopted son of the couple. Arno first uses the mantle of Iron Man in 2019 in the 2018 series Tony Stark Iron Man in issue number 19. Arno as Iron Man ended up in a fight with Tony during the seeming robot revolution, believing that the only way to solve the issue of humans versus AI was to enslave the human population. It makes sense if you're following Arno through that story. Tony was forced to then stop his brother by trapping him in his virtual armor and placing him in a dreamlike virtual reality where he was seen as a hero. I'm sure that won't end up ending badly for Tony in years to come. Right? It's not like Donald Blake was living in a virtual reality where he was happy and then realized it was fake and then escaped and then tried to kill all the Thors or anything like that. That totally didn't happen, guys.
At number 3 is the Iron Sight program that Superior Iron Man puts in place in the city of San Francisco. When his own app coerces people into spending ridiculous sums of money per day, they start to resort to violence and other crimes to afford the service. And instead of discontinuing his app for the greater good of society, he instead develops a whole program to monitor and control the masses that he calls the Iron Sight program, which is basically a giant fleet of drones flying around San Francisco, watching people and ensuring that they're all staying in line. This would include keeping crimes down, but also monitoring internet searches and other intrusive initiatives like that. It gets to the point where basically anyone with a device finds themselves constantly accompanied by an Iron Sight drone wherever they are. This shows another side to Superior Iron Man and the lengths he will go to have complete control and total autonomous power over the people of San Francisco. At number 2 is that Superior Iron Man actually restores Daredevil's vision. After he's confronted about the evil motivations behind the Extremis virus, Tony Stark decides he wants to show off the power of the virus to convince Daredevil of its efficacy. But he does it in a really vindictive and manipulative way. Daredevil accuses him of playing God, so Stark responds by saying that he's actually just playing human, and uses the virus to restore Matt Murdock's sight. This understandably overwhelms the typically blind hero and shows how much power Stark has actually amassed since being inverted during the Axis storyline. But this way of displaying his power is pretty shocking and arguably pretty cruel as well, especially considering Daredevil's sight is once again taken away once the effects of the virus wear off. The normal Tony Stark would never have shown off his power in this way. Well, he also wouldn't have developed such a dangerous and nefarious technology in the first place. But still, this act is pretty wild and something that people often overlook the significance of. At number 1 is that Superior Iron Man actually fights Captain America. This fight is definitely more well known in the context of top Superior Iron Man facts, but it's important to mention and put right at the top of the list because those who don't know about this battle need to know how crazy it was. Because this fight is arguably even more epic than when the two fight during the Civil War storyline. All of the buildup of Superior Iron Man becoming evil comes to an epic climax in issue 44 of Avengers, which is when this event takes place. It's also, spoiler alert, the last issue that we see Superior Iron Man in, because he actually dies at the end of the battle. Although Captain America doesn't really take the win either, they both die in a helicarrier crash. But as sad as that is, this is probably the only way Superior Iron Man's reign could have come to an end, with the only other person who knows Tony Stark as well as he knows himself taking him down for good. It's hard to say if without this intervention that Superior Iron Man would have ever concluded his tyrannical tirade, but it's good that Cap stepped in to put a stop to it just in case, thus capping off the short run of Superior Iron Man as a fun and suspense-filled storyline. At number 7 is that Superior Iron Man actually turns Alcatraz into his own evil lair. After Tony Stark moves to the West Coast, the app isn't the only thing he creates to get himself more power in the city. He also makes the decision that he wants to settle down and buy some property to help strike up business with other investors. But this version of Stark decides it's more his style to buy a place that's right out in the open. So out in the open that it actually takes up a whole island, Alcatraz Island. And if you're not familiar with what Alcatraz Island is, it's right off the coast of San Francisco in complete view of everyone living in the city. And Stark doesn't keep his new structure humble or hidden by any means at all. He builds an enormous secret lair that he calls Stark Island, sort of like a classic evil lair that a villain from a James Bond movie would work out of. And although it's all done legally as far as we can tell, this is just another example of Superior Iron Man's grandiosity and arrogance as a villain. At number 6 is that Superior Iron Man develops a whole new armor called the Endo Sim Armor Model 50. If you know about this suit of armor, you'd know that it's considered one of the most powerful out of all Iron Man's suits. The main property that sets this suit apart from the others is that it's made of a symbiotic material, or at least draws from the physiology of a symbiote. This means that Tony Stark can summon the armor from wherever he is, and it will crawl or float over to him and cover his body. It then hardens around him, becoming stronger than steel and arguably stronger than the original Iron Man suit. And just like a symbiote, it has properties that makes it seem like it's alive. So with a suit that's even more alive than the HUD and AI assisted original armor, it's also able to match his senses and support his each and every move without needing much verbal communication. For example, the suit actually turns red when Tony Stark gets angry, which is a pretty awesome feature actually. Even though it's basically just an aesthetic function, it proves that the armor is a living thing, which somehow makes Superior Iron Man even more intimidating than he already was. At number 5 is that Superior Iron Man starts drinking again. Normally, Tony Stark has a natural tendency towards drinking, and so he's put up some pretty serious boundaries in the past against the habit. But when his personality is inverted, Tony Stark naturally becomes more of a drinker than ever before, except with a more positive and relaxed approach to the activity. To be fair to the original Stark though, Superior Iron Man is only able to do this because of Extremis 3.0. Using the technology to keep himself healthy and relatively unaffected in any negative way by his drinking, Stark is able to indulge all he wants without issue. And in my view, this is yet another strange trait of this inverted Tony Stark, which shows another unlikable side of the former good guy. Something about him indulging in a gluttonous, unregulated lifestyle rubs me the wrong way, probably because the typical Tony, despite his issues, is able to regulate his habits and use self-control to keep himself in line, whereas Superior Iron Man is just letting loose. And although drinking surely isn't a crime, it's just an example showing that this Tony Stark isn't about to practice any self-control anytime soon, at least during this storyline. At number 4 is that Superior Iron Man actually erases Matt Murdock's memory. One of Superior Iron Man's first threats in the series is none other than Matt Murdock, aka Daredevil, and it's because Murdock starts to realize the harmful effects of Extremis 3.0 and decides to investigate. During this time, Daredevil occupies San Francisco as well, so this issue is all around him at all times during this storyline, and he has a hard time not noticing it. But what he finds even more disturbing is that Stark has actually been forcing the virus into people without their consent, and he's doing this through the water supply. So Daredevil does all he can think to do and fights Tony before threatening to tell everyone unless Stark stops what he's up to. But this is a big mistake because Stark instead immobilizes Murdock with his endosim armor and wipes his memory from the last few days. And although this is a very petty move, it does work and pretty much neutralizes Murdock's motives to take down Stark's plans. If you know the comics, you know that mind wiping is known as a pretty awful thing to do to someone, even for the worst villains. So this is a pretty nasty move by this version of Stark, who isn't even yet showing his worst side here.
Number 3, Iron Patriot, the comic version. So, in the comics, the government wants Norman Osborn to basically recreate the Avengers team. Yeah, you heard that right. Friggin' Norman Osborn. So he creates the Dark Avengers, and leads it as the Iron Patriot. Basically a combination of Iron Man, but with Captain America's colors. Now, the MCU did a version of the Iron Patriot, but they did their own spin and made Rhodey the Iron Patriot, and he did work for the government. Eventually, the Dark Avengers declare war on Asgard. Asgard is currently just hovering over a spot of land on Earth. With the siege of Asgard underway, Norman wants to use Sentry's evil side, Void, as a secret weapon to take the Asgardians down. He manipulates Sentry to allow Void to take over his body, and in the end, Norman is imprisoned on the raft. But, you know, he never stays there for very long. Number 1, Ultron, MCU version. So in the MCU, Ultron is created by, you guys guessed it, Tony Stark. After the events of the first Avengers, Tony is still dealing with the trauma of that alien invasion. He wants to make sure that if there is ever another attack, the world will be prepared. So, Tony starts the Ultron program, using the Mind Stone from Loki's scepter. At first, they just look like variations of armor that Tony has worn in the past, but controlled with his AI, basically to protect Earth against any threats to it. But Ultron deems the human race as the greatest threat against Earth, so instead of protecting the humans, he's going to wipe them out. Yeah, that's kind of dark. He was doing this initially with assistance from Quicksilver and Scarlet Witch, but Ultron's plan was coming together. His second form was made from vibranium. His plan was to lift up a city in Sokovia and allow it to come crashing down like a meteor to wipe out humanity.
Number 10, Hulk. We all know of the famous Hulkbuster suit. But would it just blow your minds if I told you that Iron Man has defeated the Hulk without it? Yes, that's right. In Iron Man issue 132, our Golden Avenger faced off mano a mano against the strongest Green Avenger. And when I tell you this was one hell of a fight, I ain't lying. After an attempt at helping Bruce Banner results in the Hulk persona emerging, resulting in Tony donning the suit and protecting his employees, the fight goes from Stark Industries to underwater to an Air Force base where the two basically play baseball with a luggage carrier and Tony's favorite jet. The resulting explosion stunned the Hulk, and in that moment, Tony mustered every bit of solar and reserve energy he could, overriding the safety protocols of his suit to hit the stunned Hulk with a singular massive punch that knocked out Hulk and killed that suit of armor. Number 9, Sentry / the Void. This is one of those do whatever the hell I can to defeat you kind of moments. In the Marvel Siege storyline, Bob Reynolds, the Sentry, one of Marvel's Superman characters, has joined with Norman Osborn and his Dark Avengers, being somewhat taken over by the Void. In the end of the story, the Sentry, using the power of the Void, was directed by Osborn to take out the floating city of Asgard, which he did, sending it crashing to the ground. And then he de-lifed Loki Loki. The other Avengers and Thor have not been able to defeat Sentry/Void yet, so as one last ditch attempt, Iron Man uses a whole Hammer helicarrier as a missile and crashes the whole thing down on top of him. This weakens the Void enough that Thor can end him with a blow from Mjolnir, but damn, Tony really just had enough of this guy. Number 8, Hawkeye. Surprise! Hawkeye does not stand a chance against Iron Man, but he did actually put up a pretty good fight the first 2 times they fought. Both times were in Tales of Suspense in issue 57 and 60. Hawkeye's first appearances before he was actually a hero, when he was instead a criminal. Natasha Romanoff, who is also a criminal at the time, tricks Clint into helping her steal Tony's powerful tech. It doesn't go too well for them though. At the end of the first fight in issue 57, Tony gets Clint clinging onto a pole, which he then bends and flicks like one of those little door stopper things, thwanging little Robin Hood here into the water and then saving the unconscious Clint from drowning. Doth Mother know you have not liked or subscribed? Well, that's okay if you don't want to, but it would be appreciated. Okay, let's move on.
Number 6, the Stark, an alien race. When the Martian Masters invaded Earth for the second time, Tony didn't want his armor or technology to fall into the wrong hands. He feared if they got a hold of it, they would be way too powerful to handle, so he launched all of his technology into space. Unfortunately, a few years later, the very rocket holding all of Tony's technology landed on an alien planet. This alien race didn't know what to make of this rocket. They were quite primitive. They started experimenting with the technology and learning everything they could about what was in the rocket. They even named themselves and their planet the Stark. I mean, that's dedication. With this new technology and armor, they were able to harness and they were able to conquer other worlds. Number 5, Tony Stark from Earth 2122. Now, there isn't a whole lot known about this version of Iron Man, but from what we do know, he's pretty dark compared to the original. For instance, he kills innocent people. Yeah, okay, that is something the original Tony would not do. Yeah, he has killed people, but not innocent people. I mean, at least not intentionally. In this world, the British won the American Revolution and control North America. And in this world, Tony is a part of the group called the Sons of Liberty.
Number 3, Spider-Man. Spider-Man and Iron Man here have a bit of an interesting relationship. In the MCU, it's very father-son, but in the comics, and specifically in the Civil War event, while Tony takes Peter under his wing and even gives him some great upgrades, actually manipulates the Spider-Lad quite a little bit. Spider-Man switches to Captain America's side, and in Iron Man Volume 4, number 14, Spider-Man, alongside a few other heroes, launch a surprise attack on Tony. While Spider-Man has beaten Tony before, specifically when Tony threatened Mary Jane and Aunt May, the use of the spider armor gave Tony a ton of information about Parker's spider sense. Not just being able to replicate it for himself, but he got the information to use Peter's against him, which he does while making a nice little baseball themed strike 1, 2, and 3, fitting as they are fighting at Yankee Stadium. Number 2, Daredevil. Number 1, Captain America. We love Civil War. Not the actual Civil War, the Marvel one. So many great examples of superheroes fighting other superheroes. But the main star of the show in this conflict is Iron Man versus Captain America. And while the climactic fight ultimately ended in a Captain America favored draw, I'd say the first major fight was definitely more of a win for Tony. In issue 3 and 4 of the main Civil War comic, a battle takes place between the forces of both Cap and Stark. While Steve is fighting Spider-Man, Iron Man comes swooping in, attacking with an armor that's analyzed every fight Cap has ever had. And he just starts going to town on the guy, feeding him the left, right, until Cap is absolutely battered. Cap still doesn't go down, so Tony uses a high frequency that shuts down the human brain. He's about to end the fight when Hercules jumps in, attacking him with an oil tanker truck.
Starting us off in at number 10, Iron Man from Earth 2020. This version of Iron Man appeared in the early 2000s run of Exiles. He's an ex-member of a team known as Weapon X. Weapon X, not to be confused with the secret program responsible for Wolverine, is similar to the Exiles. They are multiversal hopping travelers and reality fixers, but are notably more ruthless and violent than the Exiles team. And this Tony follows suit. He's cruel and was sent back to his native reality once his Weapon X team was defeated. So what does Tony do now that he's not spending his time jumping around the multiverse? Well, he decided to start a world war. That's just a natural progression, right? He commits a bunch of crimes against humanity and even gets himself wanted for treason. He eventually was defeated by Morph, who put an end to him by hitting a reboot button on his back. which is kind of anticlimactic if you think about it. Moving on to our number 9 spot, let's take a look at a man who isn't Tony Stark, but his suit is very much inspired by Iron Man, Ironmonger. We're taking a little detour from the comics at this number and looking at the MCU, the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Specifically looking at the first Iron Man film and Obadiah Stane, who was played by Jeff Bridges. Stane is Ironmonger, a character who worked for Stark in the 2008 Iron Man movie, but then betrayed him, taking his initial design of the Iron Man armor and expanding upon it. This led to an imitation Hulkbuster suit known as Ironmonger, which is an alternate version of the Iron Man suit rather than of Tony himself. Stane became the CEO of Stark Industries after Howard Stark's death, prior to Tony coming of age shortly afterwards. Now, because of this, he's always resented Tony, which caused Stane to join up with the Ten Rings in order to attempt to assassinate the younger Stark. He was then exposed by Pepper Potts and created this armor to take Tony out himself. Fortunately for Tony, Stane's Ironmonger wasn't nearly as powerful as his original suit, and he ended up killing himself in an act of cowardice rather than be arrested. Moving on to number 8, Iron Giant Man. Back to Tony Stark's with this number. So this version of Stark comes from the Mutant X universe known as Earth 1298. Not a whole lot is known about him. There was some inaccurate information about the character passed on by the Yellow Jacket of that Earth, which doesn't help us much. But it was believed that this Tony had been killed in action. Turns out that wasn't the case. So, this Tony has got some pretty narrow-minded views in this universe, being part of an anti-mutant version of the Avengers. And based off of his name, you've probably already figured out that he's got both the powers of Iron Man and Giant Man in this universe, making his prejudice and oppression even harder to tackle. He ends up getting killed alongside the other Avengers by a version of Captain America known as X-Man.
Number 7. Captain Marvel and Gamora. Combo! Wham bam! Actually, more like pew pew. Look, love it or hate it, the second Marvel Civil War event happened. I could get into what the conflict itself was actually about, but that doesn't really have anything to do with this point. The main thing you need to know is that, just like the first Civil War, the superhuman community is split, with Iron Man leading one side and Carol Danvers leading the other. At the time of this story, Iron Man was sporting his Model Prime armor, an armor that could basically shapeshift and change color for whatever it was he needed to do at the time, making the need for multiple armors a little redundant. During a conflict with Captain Marvel and her group, Tony was under attack from some pretty powerful heroes, specifically Captain Marvel and Gamora jumped in to do battle before they were dispatched from a single blast from Iron Man. Just one shot is all he needed. Damn. Number 6. Emma Frost. Did you know the Avengers fought the X-Men? Yes, it's true. And a comic titled, get this, Avengers vs. X-Men. It's a good title. Seriously though, the conflict blossomed when the Phoenix Force is headed straight to Earth with mutant Hope Summers as its supposed host. The Avengers believe this is bad juju for the population of Earth, and the X-Men think this is gonna be what they need for the mutant population to be reborn. A battle happens between the two teams at the mutant island of Utopia. Partway through, Emma Frost comes to make a move, saying telepathically to Cyclops she can shut down the Avengers telepathically, and she is going to end this. Then Iron Man chimes in, I bet you thought you were just about to end this, as he fires microscopic telepathic tasers at her and hopes she will let him make it up to her over dinner. She punches him in the stomach and he blasts back with his repulsors, but this genuinely made me snicker. Number 5. Facial hair bros. Right smack dab in the middle of the video, sort of not really, I want to do something completely different. Something finally not combat related. Yet a victory for Tony and an embarrassment for none other than Stephen Strange the Sorcerer Supreme. In Invincible Iron Man number 3, Iron Man goes to Doctor Strange for help with a little problem he is having. As he's about to leave the Sanctum Sanctorum, he goes, "Thanks, Doctor," and stays there like this for 8 comic book panels, until Steven gives him a very, very reluctant high five as Tony yells, "Awesome, facial hair bros!" And Steven says, "I hate you." I'm sorry, I had to include this. Number 4. Namor. Iron Man and Namor the Submariner have always had a pretty tense relationship, both having massive egos. They have gone at it with their words and their fisticuffs multiple different times. From what I can tell, the powerful Submariner usually has the win more than often. But Iron Man isn't a pushover. He's gotten some good shots, and in Iron Man number 25 in 1970, we have an example of him winning, in a somewhat hilarious way too. Basically, Unbeknownst to Tony, his company had been polluting the ocean with a pipeline. Now yes, that is very, very bad. But if you just go and talk to Tony, I'm sure he'd fix the issue. No, that is not the Submariner's way. No, instead, he attacks, destroying the pipeline and then attacking the buildings it's connected to. To subdue Namor, Tony uses the heating coils of his suit to evaporate all the water in Namor's body, basically rendering him powerless. And then he ties him up to an under construction tower using metal beams. It's kind of hilarious looking, and I feel like Namor could easily slip out of that, like the power of gravity, but it's certainly embarrassing.
In at number 3, Ruins. Ah, Ruins, the universe that makes you feel gross about everything in superhero comics. The Ruins version of Tony Stark is known as the Man in the Iron Mask. Now for context, Ruins is an alternate reality in which the events that gave our heroes their powers in the 616 end up deforming them or killing them in this universe. It's hyper-realistic and also incredibly depressing. For example, Bruce Banner's gamma radiation doesn't turn him into the Hulk, but rather it turns him into a giant green tumor. It's pretty nasty. Give it a Google. Back to Stark though. This version of Tony was meant to go to Vietnam to end the war, but instead found himself at a pro-secessionism movement in California, where he tried to mediate the situation. He was injured by a grenade, which led to him building his Iron Man suit of armor. He would then work with Hank Pym and Stephen Strange to create the Avengers, which was a revolutionary force whose goal was to liberate California. But the secessionist movement defeated them first, gunning down the Quinjet and effectively murdering Stark and Pym in the process. Scary reality because it's kind of realistic. And at number 2, Iron Maniac from Earth 5012. Iron Maniac is the ultimate evil Iron Man, and he's scary as f***. First appearing in Marvel Team-Up Volume 3, Issue 2 in 2005, this version of Iron Man is also entangled with Victor Von Doom, but in a very different narrative from the one from Earth 11029. Iron Maniac, who hails from Earth 5012, comes from an Earth that was ravaged by war, with many heroes dying as a result. Because of his allies and friends dying, Stark became more violent in his grief. He's got major beef with the Reed Richards of this world. While we never fully know what he blames Reed for, it's implied that Reed's actions caused several deaths. Stark sees him as a psychopath, and because of this, Stark would adopt armor that looked a whole lot like Dr. Doom's. And he even fought against the Fantastic Four. He actually killed the Human Torch, who, in the process, burnt his face. See the Doom relation there? Richards would then dispose of Stark by sending him to the 616 universe, where he encountered the 616 Fantastic Four, who mistook him for Dr. Doom returning. Stark revealed his identity, then posed as the 616 Iron Man, and despite being captured by Captain America, Black Widow, Spider-Man, and X-23, he would go on a new rampage, until he was finally stopped by the hero Freedom Ring, who sacrificed his life to put an end to Tony's reign of terror. And last but not least,